blessing upon this class and upon tonight's service. We give you thanks and praise for them both. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. The Reformation in England was not like the Reformation any place else. And Shelley, you took this class the last time, and so you're studying it again. I hope you're learning. It's really clicking this time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What if you take it 3 or 4 times, it clicks easier? then you know the answers, all right. And Brother Ken up here, he's clicking because how many years have you been studying in my classes now? Because I've filtered a little bit of this in 3 years now. 2.5, 3. 3 years.
A year.
I filtered a little bit in even the Greek classes, because when we go and we study Matthew 16, 18 and things like that in Greek, and we look at it, then you have to understand what it's talking about. So I brought in some church history with that at that period of time.
We got to keep on doing it, because then each time something else is hit on a little more, and then you can just fill in all the blanks on their paper.
You keep doing it. I tell you what, I went to the seminary for 12 years, and I am still listening to my seminary tapes that I taped over 30 years ago, somehow. And I go listen to them, and Brother Ken's listened to me with me. He's come out and helped me out there, and I'll be listening to, well, especially my history class teachers and things, and they're good, aren't they, brother? He was good. But don't, even with me, all I'm doing is introducing you to history. Because this isn't, I'm teaching you history, but I'm just throwing little bits and pieces to you. It's all just a little bit at a time, and that's all. And go back and study books. Get you an encyclopedia of world religions and things like that. Go back and study these things. I brought a little old book here that I've used so much. It's falling apart. Most of my books are falling apart. I am too, when you get this old. But this tells you about who's who in church history. Ooh. Now, this is pretty good. You can get something like this, and hopefully the binding's not falling off of it. But there's all kinds of things in here you can tell. And then always remember who's doing the writing. Look in the front of it and find out who's writing and everything else, what they're talking about, and then study. One of the foundational books that you need to study in church history, 2 of them, actually, is A History of the Baptist by John T. Christian, Volume 1 and Volume 2. This is the most honest historian that I ever read after. John Lawrence von Mosheim's Ecclesiastical History of the Christian Church. And by the way, if you want to find out what you want to study, just look in the back of this book. And at the bottom of each chapter, at the bottom of each chapter in the footnotes, when I started buying history books, I looked at John T. Christian's book, history books here, and I would look here at the end and look at each chapter and find out who he was quoting. And I didn't trust him.
No?
You trust your eternal and what you believe. Don't trust something as wonderful and great as your eternal salvation and rewards, meaning where the Lord wants you to do, where He wants you and how He wants you to serve Him. Study. Paul said, study to show thyself approved, a workman that needs not be ashamed, blush in any event. This brother even brought me a question this morning I couldn't answer. We didn't get an answer for it. But
now. Yeah.
We figured it out, though. Now, we figured it out, but I couldn't do it off the top of my head. I like that. Do that to me if you can. You'll think of something.
That one with there's who's
who in church history. Yeah, who's who in church history. You can get those encyclopedia of church history. I've got one, an encyclopedia of who's who in church history. All this kind of stuff. So you can at least go back, but you have to remember who wrote it. Always when you study history, who wrote it. Now let's get into the English Reformation. All right? The English Reformation started with whom? All you scholars?
No,
The English? No.
Oh, the king.
Young lady, I tell you, Henry, brother, you're going to have an encyclopedia right in your home. You won't need a library. You've got one right there. Started with the king. What was his name? Henry VIII. All right, King Henry VIII. The Church of England started with King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII just took advantage of the Reformation that was taking place in the rest of the world. All right? England was Catholic. England had been a Catholic country forever. Basically, Rome was the center of the Catholic Empire at this time, and they were building the Vatican and all of this. You know, they were just pouring in money right, left millions of dollars building those, you know, gathering all this art and everything, and of course, Luther and Calvin were paying for people to write sonatas and everything you can think of. You know, all of the ecclesiastical musical history was taking place at this time, and the idea was flamboyance in Christianity, in the church-state churches. All right. Well, where was the main power of the Catholic Church at this time? Where's the main power? Not in Rome, but in what nation?
And what was the year of this?
During the 1500s. Yeah. Up until, for hundreds of years.
Was it
Where was the main power, the main force? What was the main force behind the Catholic Church? The progress of the Catholic Church and the mission work of the Catholic Church.
Spain.
Spain. All right.
Isabella.
Pick this up. Yeah, Isabella. You know, she sent Columbus over here to America. The Pentanita and the Santa Maria came wandering over here, conquering to conquer. And all up and down the coast of California, from way down in San Diego and down even into Mexico and South America, there were missions established all the way up the coast. These missions were slave plantations, is what they were. They gathered up the American Indians over here on this side of the world, and they either killed them, they hunted them like animals, or else they became slaves in these missions, and that's basically what it was. And wherever the Catholic Church touched down, they established missions, these slave plantations. In California, the Native American population was cut down by about 98% of it was completely devastated. What other country in the world ever did that? Went into another, what?
Germany?
Well, no, Germany didn't.
Not that much.
nothing like that. Well, not unless you go back to Rome with the Jews when they were deported back in Nebuchadnezzar and everything. But still, it wasn't to the extent that was done here. You know, and in your history, studying anthropology.
Yeah, I think it went from approximate of 13 million down to like 1 or less million Indians that were after fighting and disease.
Yeah, fighting and disease. But literally in California was one of the hardest hit places, and it was because of the Catholic Church. That was why. You either follow them or you die. And that was all. They used those Indians, they put them in dungeons and kept them chained up while they worked in these places. Of course, they were Christianizing them, teaching them trades, and they were slaves. That's what they were. Go over there at Santa Barbara Mission. Just go up San Miguel, all up and down the coast, and look. Study a little bit of your church history. Mm-hmm. Spain was the mistress of the sea. And her power was backed by the Catholic Church, and wherever she went, conquering to conquer. They went and landed and went completely across the middle part of America at one time. Remember? Cortez and all the way across the state plains through Texas and everything, went and conquering, looking for gold. All over South America, Central America, looking for gold and the fountain of youth and all of this.
Northwest Passage.
And yeah, all of this in the name of the church. We're talking about the Catholic Church, okay? Now we come to England, and we see the power of Catholicism. And England is under the power of the Pope. Every nation in Europe, basically, when a king wanted to get married, he just didn't choose anybody he wanted to get married. Did you know that? He had to get the Pope's permission. Well, that's the way it was. Why? Because the Pope wanted to keep control of those nations. When we come up to Henry VIII, Henry was an educated person. He lived from 1491 to 1547, by the way. He was brought up to be a king. His brother was Arthur. Arthur died when he was young. Henry didn't even live very long. By the way, Henry lived to be 56. I think I told you last week, one history I said he lived to be 38. It was not 38. It's 56. All right? And he lived a little bit longer. That was still not very long, but 56 years old. Okay? He came on the throne when he was very young because Arthur died. And Arthur had a wife, was Catherine of Aragon, which was Spain. She was a Spanish, and Arthur had married a Spanish woman. That's who he had permission to marry. And England was Catholic controlled. Well, Henry married. He was engaged to Catherine when he was 12 years old, and he finally consummated that marriage later when he was 16 or 18 years old. His brother.
Wasn't she older than him, Joe?
Oh yeah, she was older.
That's right.
They had a child. The child's name was Mary. Okay, and and their firstborn child was a girl. Now, remember, in the Bible, a firstborn heir is the firstborn of a family is the heir. Okay. Well, when King Henry VIII, when Catherine gave him a daughter, he wouldn't have anything else to do with her. She was no more use because she had her firstborn. All right? So he wanted to divorce her, and he was courting a girl by the name of Anne Boleyn. And she was very young. And he wanted to marry her. He just was in love with her, and he just thought that she will give me a son, a firstborn son. And I'll have a son to be king after me. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a son. Okay? Well, he asked the Pope to give him a divorce from Catherine, because the Bible says that a man should not lie with his brother's wife. And it does say that. But it also says
Not in that context.
Not in that context, but that they were twisting and wresting the scriptures, and he had the Archbishop of Canterbury doing this for him and dealing with the Pope, and they were sending messages back and forth between Britain and Spain, and the Pope just said, no, 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 no. Catherine was Catholic. Henry was the defender of the Catholic faith, by the way, at that time, and he was the devout Catholic. But he was mad. He also didn't want some pope telling him what to do. If anything, he was going to be the pope. So he decides to be the pope. He tells the Catholic Church, get out of my nation. I am now the head of the church. I am going to be the pope. And this is the greatest theft. I mean, the Catholic Church stole from everybody else in history. But this is the greatest bank robbery from the Catholic Church that ever took place. He stole every church building, every minister, all the pews, and all of the nation of England, and took it over and said, it's mine. Get out. And don't come back. Well, Spain was trying now. I mean, they had the Armada, the Spanish Armada. You know, they were the mistress of the sea. And all of this fighting was going on. Well, Henry married Anne Boleyn. He gave himself a divorce, and he married Anne Boleyn. Well, she had a daughter, Elizabeth. So guess what was going to happen to Anne Boleyn? He accused her of adultery and chopped her head off. Got rid of her. How many of you, you've seen movies about Henry VIII? I mean, he's a real flamboyant figure in history. The English Reformation was not over doctrine, was not over religious freedom, was not over anything. The English Reformation was because King Henry VIII wanted a divorce. And once he was in control of his marital affairs, he did what he wanted to, and he took the nation, all of the churches. Not only did he get all the buildings, but he got all the tithes. What a tremendous amount of revenue was coming in here now to the king, and he was just blowing it, just right and left. Now, he didn't have this England didn't have this revenue before that was coming from the people. And anyway, he went on, and then he started hit the Reformation in England. Okay, now remember during this period of time that John Calvin and John Knox have a lot to do with influencing England, and this during this period of time. Well, King Henry VIII finally kept. He married 6 times.
Trying to get a son.
Trying to get a son. He finally had a son, Edward VI, I think it was. And Edward VI lived between 1537 and 1553. He was a kid. That was the child king. Yes.
So somebody's asked me this question before. How far down the line, great-grandson, great-great-grandson was King James that wrote the Bible?
Well, King James had the King James Version done in 1611. And I've got a little thing in here on that, too. We're going to try to get into that, if I can get there a little bit later on during this class, if I can make it. But King James is a successor of Henry VIII. All right, this is his grandfather, so to speak. Okay, great-great-great-grandfather. This is between 1491 and 1547 now. The King James Version was 1611. Okay, it's not too many years from on the other side of this. Okay, Henry VIII lived to be 56 years old. He finally had a child by Anne Boleyn, which name was Elizabeth. Elizabeth became very famous. She was Elizabeth I. All right, Queen Elizabeth. She straightened out a lot of Henry's mistakes. And but he had her mother killed. He married Jane Seymour, and Jane Seymour basically in complications from childbirth died, and she had Edward VI, and that was the boy that was 16 years old, and he was king from the time he was 10 years old till he was 16 years old. Now Edward basically was a sickly little boy. He was a very sick little boy. He had a lot of religion in his heart. He thought a lot about religion. And remember that John Knox and Calvin were influencing him, and of course Baptists were influencing him. And during this period of time that he lived, there was a small amount of religious liberty in England. Baptists were preaching, and so were the Calvinists preaching. And the Calvinists and the Baptists were getting together, and that's how the Baptists become known as Calvinistic in nature, because what we call the particular and the general Baptist in England popped up about this period of time. The general Baptist believed that Jesus Christ died for all mankind, and that there was unlimited atonement. Last week we talked about tulip, remember? All right, limited atonement, that's the L. Okay, tulip, remember that? Okay, L is limited atonement. And I is what? Irresistible grace. Okay? And, of course, T is preservation of the saints. Now, the Church of England was greatly affected. Church of England's doctrines changed greatly because of the influence of the Baptists and the Calvinists in England. Matter of fact, England almost went over to Presbyterian at one time. They got a lot of control through John Knox in England. The general Baptists were those that believed in that God calls all men to salvation, and He prepared for all men to be saved. In other words, Jesus Christ did shed His blood for all mankind, which is really biblical. Okay? Calvin, in the beginning, when he first started teaching, Calvin taught what? He taught strong limited atonement. And so did Augustine. Remember, you saw that book on Augustine? Believed in this limited atonement way back when. Well, he was a student of Augustine. Another thing that Augustine did, he spiritualized the Scriptures. And that's why the Calvinists today are so messed up on eschatology. That's end times. They confuse Israel with the church so much. They get them mixed up. And you have to keep them separate because God does have a plan for Israel in the end time. And we studied last week about Martin Luther, didn't we? The Lutherans. They hated the Jews, and Luther hated the Jews and called for all of them to be incarcerated in his state church. Where was that? Germany. And all of his influence in Germany and calling for these Jews to all be incarcerated, the males to be neutered, the females not to be allowed to have any children, and worked to death in these work camps. Well, when Hitler came on the scene, guess what? All he had to do was repeat Luther's story and tell how bad the Jews were.
Religious icon.
That was hell. Even though he wasn't religious or anything, but the people were influenced. They were all set up for this to happen. Okay? TULIP, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. The Presbyterian Church and Knox taught these doctrines, which came from Calvin. Calvin was a lawyer. He really had his doctrines set down, and he was immovable in the beginning. As he got older, he finally started teaching that there was no such thing as limited atonement, that God did prepare for salvation for all mankind. And this irresistible grace. There were a lot of Baptists in England that were called particular Baptists because they believed that God had picked out those that would be saved. And basically, in America, back over here, in just a few years later, we're going to find out that Daniel Parker in America was teaching this same thing. And that's where we have the hard shell and the primitive Baptists in America. Okay, I hope it's not going all over your head. You're catching some of this as it goes by. Too many names. All right. And this is also where the Free Will Baptists got started over here in this country because they ran the other way. Some of these General Baptists in England got to be Armenian. Armenian. What does that Armenian mean?
On the liberal side.
That means that you can be saved by grace, but you have to add works, or you're not going to get there. Okay? Simple as that. Salvation, you're baptized, and your original sin is washed away, but you have to keep your slate clean from then on. And that's not salvation by grace, is it? That's back to Catholicism. Okay? And of course, the Catholic Church at this time was teaching this also. They were, the Church of England in the beginning was salvation by works. As we see some of the great writers, English writers, some of them would really teach salvation by grace. Study some of those Thayer and some of the other great writers in England. Okay? And also be careful when you study them in Greek, because they'll start making excuses for sprinkling babies with the word baptizo, which means immerse, okay? Well, we got General Baptists, we got particular Baptists, and we got Baptists over there in England, too. There were some that didn't go either way. They were just Baptists, and they held to all the basic truths, salvation by grace, but they didn't get caught up in this tulip business. All right? As simple as that. Well, Henry died. Edward took his place because this was his heir. All right, and then when Edward died, after 6 years on the throne, from 10 to 16, he had to set out the prayer book, or the religious ceremonies that they're supposed to go through in the Church of England. He had a little situation set up here where this is what our church service is going to be like. Okay? And that was her liturgy. He helped put that together. And this guy was 10 to 16 years old. He was really a spiritual little kid. But anyway, and he did give a certain amount of religious liberty in England at that time. He tolerated Baptists. Well, after poor little Edward died, guess who comes to the throne? Who's the next firstborn heir of Henry VIII?
Bloody Mary.
Bloody Mary. All right, that's who? Catherine's daughter. Catherine's daughter. Catherine's daughter. Boy, she is a mess. She is going to bring England back to the Catholic Church. She starts killing people, chopping their heads off, burning them at the stake. She's as nuts as the bad ones. Okay, I mean, she's a nutcase. She's killing people right and left. Baptists are burning like stoves wood in England, and everybody else. All of the Anglican churches, the people that held on to the Church of England. She's bringing the Pope back into England. She's trying to kill everybody. Well, she doesn't last too many years. But even England hates Bloody Mary. And then she was replaced by Mary, another Mary. And then, guess what happened? Anne Boleyn's daughter pops up. Elizabeth first. Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth is a Protestant. She brings the Church of England back into England, and she allows John Knox to come and preach also. And she allows a certain amount of religious liberty at this time. And there's some turmoil there, but she's setting down some religious rules. There's still this persecution against other religions, but she's bringing in. And the Catholic Church basically is pushed out of England. And England's state church takes back over again. But at this period of time, because of John Knox, his influence through Calvin, the Church of England starts teaching, some of their ministers start teaching a salvation by grace and a true calling from God and true conversions. Which isn't, that's better than what it was before, isn't it? Mm-hmm. A little bit. But it doesn't come all the way to the truth. Because they could have given religious liberty. But guess what? When the state is in control of the religion and all the tithes are going to the state, it's taxes, you know.
Certain amount of power there.
There's a lot of power in this here. There's power involved in here. State political power. Well, during this period of time, after Bloody Mary died, Elizabeth I comes on the scene. Well, Spain is still the mistress of the sea. All right, and there was and Bloody Mary had married Philip II of Spain. And Philip II was a Catholic, of course. And he's over there after Elizabeth comes to the throne. And Sir Francis Drake has come on the scene now too. Who was Sir Francis Drake?
He was a pirate hired out by the English to raid Spanish galleons.
Yeah. All right. That's what they were. You know, here this is a religious war going on here between England. What?
He was Protestant.
Yeah, he was Protestant.
Motivations.
He lined up with Elizabeth. All right. Elizabeth was a brilliant little girl. Her mother got her head chopped off young, and she, evidently, there had to be, Anne Boleyn must have had some good genes someplace, because this daughter's a little smarter than the old dad and a few of the others. Well, anyway, she lines up this pirate, Sir Francis Drake, and England changes naval warfare forever. How many of you ever watched the old swashbuckling movies and everything like that? Naval warfare at one time was not naval warfare. England was going to change naval warfare, and this is what was going to happen. All right? Naval ships were great big galleons, heavy galleons. They were going out, they had a lot of room in the bottom of them to store gold and silver and slaves and everything wherever they went. They were big, deep ships, and they were high above water also. And they had ballast in here, and this was usually, they carried stones in here, rocks, so this thing wouldn't tip too far. This was ballast. And as they went over there, and they went conquering over here into America or wherever they went, they would replace the stones with gold and silver. Take some stones out and put gold and silver in there. And they had cannons up here along the way, and big old tall masts. You've seen some of these big ships. You know, we talked about earlier, the Pinta, the Nita, and the Santa Maria. All of these were great big Spanish galleons. Well, during this period of time now, Sir Francis Drake came on the scene, and another man, which is basically unknown in history. They helped develop a different kind of warfare. Before this period of time, when two ships had come together out at sea, it really wasn't naval warfare. They would lash each other together and get out there and go and see who could outfight the other with the swords. That's what it was. It was land warfare on the sea. Sir Francis Drake said, we're not going to have any more of that business. That's kind of silly. That's kind of crazy. We got ships out here. Let's do something different. So how do you do that? You got stealth bombers. These are stealth ships. All right, they had big, tall masts and everything on them, just like all the other ships, except they were long, and they were, a lot of the ship was underwater, like this. And so they were logged on water. Now, if you're going to have cannons, if you're shooting, a big target's easier than a little target, isn't it? So, these were little targets. And the cannons were up here just above water to where they could fire and elevate them, where they could fire into the other vessels. Philip II of Spain put an armada together of about 130 ships, the largest thing that had ever been afloat at that period of time, and sent it sailing toward England, and he was going to take England back to the Catholic Church, because he was married to Bloody Mary for a while, and surely they'll be ready for me to just say, hey, you're going to be Catholic again. Let's come back home to Mama Rome. Okay? Well, it didn't quite work out like that. He sent his fleet to sail, and they ran into a couple of real bad storms, which destroyed and tore up a lot of vessels. Finally, they got to England. And when they got to England, they met some of the English ships out there in the waters, out the channel and everything. And the English ships just maneuvered it away from them. And on every Catholic ship was a bishop or an archbishop or a cardinal. This was religious war. They were doing a lot of praying and holy water and things going all over the place. And these people were going to get into heaven now if they were going to fight for Spain and for the Church of Rome. All right? And they had all the booty they could take back home from England was going to be theirs. That was their wages. And all the women they could steal and whatever, that was all right. Okay? Well, they got out there, and these English ships just stayed away from them. They didn't want to lash up to them, get out there and fight with their little swords. They said, these English people are cowards. They are cowards. So they run around chasing the English ships. And the English ships finally they got close enough to them, they started firing and sinking those Spanish ships. And they didn't know what to do. They were outmaneuvering them, and they were really, naval warfare had begun. Modern naval warfare was invented right now. And the whole naval history of the world was about to change. All right? The naval history of the world was about to change, and it took place right here. Finally, Spain floated around out there with what was left of her armada. And finally they said, well, we can't get these rascals close enough to these rascals to fight them and whip them out here. Let's just go ashore in one of the harbors, and we'll just go in there and we'll start fighting on shore. Well, all the ships made the mistake of going in shore at one place because they were going to have a big army there. So England loads up some ships, some old ships with all the gunpowder they can load up to them, and sent them sailing unmanned right into the nest of these ships and blew them and burned them out of the water. And that was the end of the Spanish Armada and the end of Spain as being the mistress of the sea. And England began to be the mistress of the sea ever since then. All right, Catholic Church gained complete control. The Anglican Church gained complete control, or the Church of England, over England. Now they're secure and safe, and they don't have to mess with Spain anymore over there, even though we still got problems over there today in Ireland, different places. This war isn't over, but it's very small compared to what it was. And all it would take was the Pope to say one time, stop it. And in reality, all of that civil war over there would stop. But he wants control too. He doesn't want to give it up. He wants to want to give that little war. If he can get entrenched back in there, that's money. And besides that, they've been insulted ever since Henry VIII. Stole all their churches and all their money. Everything. Well, England starts going, and then we have a lot of people coming from England over to America and settling religiously over here. And some of these particular Baptists, mostly the particular Baptists, now since England is the mistress of sea and they're going out, by the way, there still is a lot of pirate warfare going out and there's still pirates, believe it or not, there's still pirates at sea. Do you know that? There are still people out there that are pirates, that are robbing ships and little private things all over, out in there today. That's open waters. All kinds of things happen out in open waters. A lot of the times when the ships are just left floating out there and unmanned and everything else, everybody's gone, all the money's gone, everything's gone, so that's what happens is pirates. Well, early America is being founded here. We talked a week or so ago about Dr. John Clark and Roger Williams. Roger Williams, in most histories, is given credit for establishing the first free colony in Rhode Island in America. Actually, John Clark did that. Roger Williams went back to England with him, but I think Roger Williams spent the whole period of time of going back 12 years and begging England, the King of England, to give him a writ where he could go back to Rhode Island. And Roger Williams and John Clark, they established in Providence and Newport, Rhode Island, they established 2 different churches. Well, Dr. John Clark was a medical doctor and also a legitimate ordained pastor. The early Baptist churches would not accept Roger Williams. Because remember how Roger Williams, how did he get here and how did he establish his church? How did he do it? The particular Baptists at that time, which Dr. John Clark was, did not agree with Roger Williams and his doctrine. But they helped each other greatly fight for freedom of religion. Roger Williams' group, he had his deacons, which he was going to ordain, baptize him, and then he baptized them. And John Clark says you don't have any church authority to do what you're doing. So they didn't really, they helped each other, but they didn't exchange church members. Let's just put it that way. And John Clark's church was established in 1638, Roger Williams in 1639. Well, these churches began to spread throughout America. They're particular Baptists and the primitive Baptists, they became primitive Baptists over here, and then some of the regular Baptists that came from England started established, and there is where we have the Free Will Baptist group, and they were established in South Carolina. Basically, that's where the foothold of Free Will Baptists are in America, in South Carolina. Okay, and then they spread from there out all the way to California. And of course, we had the Dust Bowl that helped the people to get from the Midwest out to. Are you part of that Dust Bowl?
No. My family wasn't. When they did it, it just flashbacks from stories that I heard.
Well, that's how Baptists got here. Was through this Dust Bowl that came about back there, terrible times, so they came to California to make things better. And they came from those areas, and that's how the churches in California were established. Okay, let's go back in history a little bit now. Daniel Parker, that was very famous at that time. We have Alexander Campbell, that's thrashing around in the 1700s. Alexander Campbell is a Baptist in the beginning. By the way, did you know that? What church did the Alexander Campbell establish? Anybody remember from last time? The Church of Christ, or the Christian Church, okay? And Alexander Campbell, in the beginning, had a debate with a great Presbyterian preacher. His name was McCullough. There was a McCullough-Campbell debate. And basically, everybody believed that, back then they didn't have television, remember. That was before radio and before television. And people liked to see if they could learn something new now and then. So they would go to church. That was great back in those days. You get people coming to church because they wanted to go do something besides sitting around the fireplace.
It's the only way that they can congregate without the British soldiers getting on cases.
Well, America really is just barely in its infancy here. some of this is even before that. I want to go back to George Washington and some of the missionaries that were sent out in different areas here.
Are these guys, Campbell, they're the mid-1600s or
1700s.
1700s?
All right. Alexander the Campbell. The Campbellites. This is the Campbellite movement that we're talking about now. Okay, they're called Campbellites. That's what Baptists call the Church of Christ. But Alexander Campbell, when he debated this McCullough, he was debating it from a Baptist standpoint, and he said that down through the ages that God's churches, there was a succession of Baptist churches all the way from Christ, and it didn't have to start again in the Reformation with John Calvin, and he taught all these things. Finally, Alexander Campbell did what happened so terribly, and how did the Catholic Church evolved. And there was a great thing over infant baptism and what part baptism played in salvation. And Alexander Campbell finally said that he is going to reform Christianity altogether. He is going to reform Christianity. And he starts teaching baptismal regeneration. And the point that they're coming from here is a sound point in one area. The Church of Christ today does not accept anybody else's baptism except theirs. And you've got to be baptized by them because they say that they are the link that came down through all the ages. And before Alexander Campbell was excluded from a Baptist church, he was part of that link, by the way. He really did go back to Baptist succession. And he teaches the doctrine of Baptist succession, and how many of you ever gone by a Church of Christ? And what does it say on there? Founded what? AD 33. That's right. It goes back to what Baptists taught for so long, except we say AD 30. At the beginning of Christ's ministry. It's not the end. Okay? Well, Alexander Campbell taught those Baptist truths. But he got off onto a tangent. Now remember when we read the doctrines of the Paulicians. What was their doctrine on music in church? No instrumental music in church at all. Guess what Alexander Campbell did? A cappella only. He did get that truth from Baptist history. And they beat on these old-time Baptist doctrines. Dogmas is what they actually were. Remember I told you sometimes Baptists do things that aren't exactly right? That's one of them. They were beating on this bandwagon of no instrumental music. Well, we would be excluded from the Paulician churches with all the music and things we got going down here all the time. But the Paulicians were fighting what in their area, and they went too far to the other side of the fence. They were fighting the great orchestration of Calvin and Luther and the Church of England, all of these big bands and orchestras they had in the churches, and they were saying a church is a group of believers, not a big building with a bunch of instruments in it. So they said, let's run all the way to the other side over here and not have any instruments at all. That was one of the doctrines that they went a little bit too far on. We have to say, when we're wrong, we have to say we're wrong. We just have to get them down there and just swallow that crow. By the way, I killed a crow here a while back, and I tried to feed it to my cats. The cats wouldn't eat it. So I know what eating crow is. Now it must be so bad that even a cat won't eat it. They were out there knocking all the nuts off the trees and everything else and tearing up everything else, so I chased a few of them off and killed a couple of them. The cats wouldn't eat them. I had to throw them in the garbage can or burn them or whatever. They didn't want them. Sometimes we have to eat crow, and it's not good sometimes. Some of the things that we practice today may not be just exactly like it ought to be. And we ought to remember that in what we teach and what we do. Okay? All during this period of time, the primitive Baptists went so far with Daniel Parker that they say there's a two-seed the doctrine of the two seeds. Do you remember me talking about the two-seed doctrine before? All right. What's the two-seed doctrine? The two-seed doctrine is down in the annals of history, or in the annals of eternity past, that God decided who would be saved and who would be lost, and there's nothing that you can do about it in time and place. You know that even Jesus Christ died in space of time to save you. All right? God does know who's going to be saved back there in eternity past, and He did write your names in the Lamb's Book of Life. But it had a lot to do with what you were going to do right here. And your free volition. Volition means what? Freedom of will. God created man in His blood-flowing likeness, in His shadow-casting likeness, in His spiritual likeness, and in His sovereign likeness too. The most dangerous thing that God ever gave you was a sovereign will of choice. And God is omniscient, isn't He? If God isn't omniscient, He's not God. Simple as that. I heard an Armenian preacher get up one time and said, back then, in the past, God didn't know who was going to be saved and who was going to be saved because He chose not to know. That disnullified God. He chose not to know. The Bible says that He knew, and He wrote down our names in the Lamb's Book of Life because He knew what was going to happen in time and space. And when Christ died in time and space, He shouted victory in paradise, said, I have overcome. All right? I'm going as fast as I can go and get you as much information as I can. Got about 10 more minutes. That's all right, you hear. Well, Daniel Parker taught that people were of one or the other seed, and there was nothing you could do about in space and time. There was nothing you could do about your salvation at all. Because if you were going to be saved, Alma, you were going to go to church, and there was nothing you could do about it, and God was going to save you at a certain time when you were going to be saved. And all of the others in the world, the reason why they didn't go to church because they were the seed of the devil. You were the seed of God, you were children of God, and in time you would finally make that known, and you would be so happy that you were chosen. Or you would never go to church and go to hell because you were never God's to begin with. You were the seed of Satan. All right? Now, in every lie, there's also a little bit of truth in it. From what we see in the Bible, from what we can understand, a person can be born of Satan. Like you're born of God. You can just rebel and reject God for so long in your life. There's a period of time, there's a point of no return. So there is a little bit to that two-seed doctrine. But it's not like they say. But you do have a volition in your life. And that volition does not take away from the sovereignty of God and the choice of God. The choice God made to save you through the person of Jesus Christ. But the most dangerous thing that He ever gave you was your freedom of choice, your volition, to make that choice. Of course, God doesn't call you that. Always remember. Where you have Armenianism over here and Calvinism over here, there's truth over here. There's truth to that, or they couldn't bounce on that bandwagon, could they? And there's truth over here. God did write our names down in the Lamb's Book of Life in eternity past. And there is a freedom of choice, as they teach over here. But that freedom of choice doesn't have anything to do with you keeping your own salvation. That freedom of choice simply means that one point in your life, your will was broken, and your heart was broken, and you repented of your sins through the calling of the Holy Spirit. And even Calvin, in the last days of his life, 1 John 2:2, he says that the door of hope and salvation has been lightened in every heart of every man without choosing on God's part. In other words, that call goes out to all mankind. We believe that. That's one of the points of Valley Baptist Church here. Well, we have Daniel Parker here in the two-seed business. You're either born of the Spirit of God or you're born of the Spirit of Satan. Now we have, how many of you ever heard of the Judson boys? Adoniram Judson, the Judson Missionary, the Judson Press. Oh, okay, now we're doing this. These two boys were congregational preachers, and they were on the road to Burma to go as missionaries over there. And by the way, it's a long way by ship from America to Burma. And on the way over there, they made the mistake of reading their Bibles. And they were saved. En route to go to the mission field. All right? And they became Baptists in doctrine. Because of, I tell you what, if you study the Bible without any preference, congregationals, basically a group out of a Protestant group out of the Church of England. Okay? And so they go over there into Burma. One of them comes back, and they came over here and established an association over here, a triennial association. Every 3 years they would meet, and basically they would collect funds for missions, and mainly for Adoniram Judson over there in Burma, as he goes over there and establishes missions. Okay? Also, early in 1707, the Philadelphia Association was founded. And that was mainly out of particular Baptists from England. There were some in America. Then we have the Whitfield, George Whitfield, the great religious revival in America. And then we have Division of Baptists over here again. What are the Baptists called over here?
General and separate.
Okay, we have regular Baptists here, and we have separate Baptists in America. The regular Baptists are those people that went along with the regular doctrines of the Baptist churches in America. Okay? Basically, it was salvation by grace only. It was basically Calvinistic in doctrine. They believed in salvation by grace. That God did the saving. God does the calling. And God gets you to heaven. And then there was a separate Baptist. George Whitfield went throughout, and George Whitfield was a congregational preacher. And he was Arminian in doctrine in many ways. He went throughout America preaching and great revivals. John R. Rice was another great revivalist in America. Have you ever heard of John R. Rice? He went through establishing churches throughout all of America and debating and everything. Well, George Whitfield was one fiery evangelist, and I mean thousands of people were being saved all across America wherever this man preached. And he was a very emotional preacher. And remember, there wasn't television and there wasn't radio back at this time, so people would go out to hear something new. All right, and all during this time, we have the Protestant Revolution, and of course we still have Baptists going through there just kicking out the Word of God as they went. And then we have Catholicism, and we have all the Protestants. We've got Calvin, we've got Lutherans, we've got John and Charles Wesley standing and separating from the Church of England, and they came out and they started teaching their method of study. That's how you get the word Methodist, from John and Charles Wesley, from their method of study. And by the way, what is their doctrine of salvation? It's Arminian. Oh, salvation by works. You are baptized for the remission of sins when you're a baby. And when you come to the age of 12 years old, then you confirm that, and from that period of time, you have to keep your life clean, or you're not going to go into the presence of God. As simple as that. It's a salvation by a little bit of grace and a whole lot of works. All right? All this is taking place at the same time, flowing down through history. And if you look into your little back of your trail of blood, you'll see all of that taking place at the same time. And all the time that this is going on, the cults are beginning to stick their little dirty heads up. All there at the same time, too. Because religious liberty is Baptists have won the religious liberty in the world, basically, by their blood. And now everybody's jumping on the wagon and have a right to believe what they want to, and that's true. They have a right to believe what they want to. You can go to hell if you want to, or you can go to heaven. That's that volition I was talking about a while ago. We're not going to, Baptists have never killed anybody for believing what they believe. The Mormon Church will tell you different than that. They think Baptists are terrible. They say that we're one of the greatest persecutors of the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church has never been persecuted. They've done a lot of persecuting. And you can go over there in Idaho and in Utah and Colorado and through those countries and just find out how much religious liberty you have over there. And try to get a job. All right. You've been over there, haven't you, brother?
Lived there for 2 years.
All right. Well, back during this period of time, and we've only got a few minutes left, we have the primitive Baptists that won't even send out a missionary at all. Because they say that God's going to get you saved if you're going to be saved. And that's all. All they're going to do is get up and preach to the saved. And of course, we have the Presbyterian Church. The church has been established in this country over here. And by the way, all the liberty that was ever given to any church in America was basically based upon what Roger Williams and John Clark did in Rhode Island. That's where it was established. There was no, America was not going to be a religiously free country. It was going to be just like Europe. It was going to be a state church situation. And in early America, every state had a different state church. Pennsylvania was a little different. They allowed a certain amount of it, but you still had to pay for the state church. As long as you paid your taxes and things and went to the state church, you could do partially what you wanted to do. A little bit of a liberty there. George Washington was a Baptist. He was saved, I guess, during the Revolutionary War. There was a great Baptist preacher. Trying to think of his name. I can't think of it right now. He was a missionary. He was, by the way, he was whipped and beaten. And they tried to stop him from preaching in different areas in state churches. Basically, the Puritans, there was not a free society where they were. Roger Williams, what?
Was it Rice? No, there was a guy get kicked out of the state because of what he was talking about.
Yeah, Rice was one of them. I can't think of the other guy's name there, and I can't find it in my notes where it is. My notes are so sloppy. All right, anyway, we have the Southern Baptist Convention that is established in 1707. And they established that church to send out missionaries, or that not church, but convention to send out missionaries. There were other associations in America at the same time, and there were some that were growing. Some of them split out of the Southern Baptist Convention. There were great leaders in the Southern Baptist. James Boyce was one of them. How many of you ever heard of James Boyce? He established some of the very first theological schools in America. Had a lot to do with it. J.R. Graves. J.R. Graves was a great Southern Baptist leader. He was accused of beginning a movement. Basically, it was called landmarkism. All right. And he preached. He wrote a book called Old Landmarkism. What is it? And I think I still have that book, and a lot of other books.
He was accused of it, but
he was accused of bringing in new doctrines in the Southern Baptist Convention, in the doctrines of landmarkism.
So it was just an informational book he wrote instead of a doctrinal book?
It was a doctrinal book. It was to call people back to the ancient landmarks that were started. I remember Brother Phil preached that here a couple of years ago. He said it called us back to the old ancient landmarks, and that was basically from the same scriptures that J.R. Graves wrote from. J.R. Graves lived in Tennessee, in Nashville, Tennessee. He had what they called the Tennessee Baptist, was a book, or not a book, but a magazine, a newspaper that was sent out for many years, and it was the largest read magazine all over America. And he preached these doctrines of what is called old landmarkism, that churches basically succeeded down through the ages, not especially from church to church, but Matthew 16:18, the same thing that I've taught you, that upon this church Christ, or upon this foundation Christ, he would build his churches, and the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And he taught basically that Baptists were not Protestants. Okay. These are the things that J.R. Graves taught, and he fought hard on it. He preached on the Lord's Supper. He preached what they call close communion. That the Lord's Supper should be only partaken of Baptists in a particular congregation. That the one loaf stood for Christ and for the one congregation of believers, where it was. And these are some of the doctrines that J.R. Graves taught. Well, from the Southern Baptist Convention, split off other conventions. The American Baptist Association, the American Baptist Convention. The Northern Baptists, of course, were on the other way, and they went away. The Southern Baptists were the churches of the South, basically. They believed in, during the Civil War, the Southern Baptist churches, basically, we lost the war. That's what happened, you know. The North won. The Southern Baptists preached that in all of those congregations all through the South, that a state should have rights, as America was founded, to make decisions that they wanted to make. And that was going on, and boy, I mean, there was warfare in churches and everything else. Associations were splitting off every which direction. And we're a descendant of those churches today, a combination of all of them. James Boyce, J.R. Graves, the Southern Baptist Convention, all of that is where we are descendants of that today. And we're going to study a little bit about those particular things as we go along for the next 2 weeks. After the next 2 weeks, I'm going to see if I can get permission to teach about the cults. But I wanted to give you and found you some real good study. Know what you believe and why you believe it, and then you can give an answer to somebody. Say, why do I go to church where I go? There's a reason why we go to Valley Baptist Church. It's the greatest church in Bakersfield. We know that already. We've proven that, haven't we? Well, haven't we? We've proven that by the congregation, the people, how we care for each other and everything else. Thank you so much for your attention tonight. I hope you learned the history and the promises of God's Word, because Baptist history is the promise in God's Word. That's why we still are here today. That's why we're still preaching the things that we're preaching today, because of the promises that God gave to His churches. Father, thank you for your Word and for these promises that you've written herein, and help us to appreciate it. Help us to understand the things that we have today, the freedoms that we have, and that our salvation was not free. It was from Christ, and He paid it all. That the religion that we follow today was not free. Our forefathers gave it all for us. Father, thank you for this heritage that we have. Help us to be worthy carriers of that truth today, that we might honor and glorify you always in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.